A lot of the occult horror films from the 70s were very psychologically driven because of the times that they were in. I think that the Howling, the reference in the Howling was that they try to talk about therapy, Gestalt therapy, other kinds of therapy, and that mindset, and try to set it up a little bit, in the Howling. And when you think about the movement that happened in psychology in the late 70s, it seems to make sense that a lot of the occult horror films of that time would be all psychologically driven, and I think I get that. They weren't exactly so blood and guts. It was more of the internal struggle and how people were seeing their world or dealing with it, or things that they weren't prepared to deal with, maybe some new realities that they were reaching or new truths that they were reaching through their therapy that were actually scarier than what they were going through at the current time. So I think that has a bit of a psychological effect and a theme that probably came over in a lot of writing, a lot of themes in the late 70s. And that's just my theory. That's what I've seen. The Mephisto Waltz, great film with Alan Alda and Jacqueline Bisset, with Jacqueline Bisset on a pentagram on the floor, in the middle, and as the poster, groovy. A lot of those later 70s films were like that. They just had that feel.
Yeah, but all the ones I remember, the 70s, they also had a lot of blood and death and strange killings and all that stuff in the occult.
And it could be
they were also there was also a great sensual
because they were outside
sexiness to them as well.
Well, yeah, they had a sensual that was always tied into them.
Sex and death, baby. You can't.
Yeah,
it's all about the sex and death.
Well, you're forgetting the one thing, okay? Money. And if you don't have money, you're not going to have much sex, and then you're always going to have death.
Well, the occult guys always had money because they had big, crazy mansions and stuff like that, and followings, and you got to have money for those candles because those are going to cost you too. So you do have to manifest some money in there.
Oh yeah,
right.
Oh yeah.
So, are you working on any ideas of any other screenplays coming up, Rob?
Oh, sure. Yes, I think that we have about 5 we're sitting on right now, and they're in various stages of development. So there's factors that are just going to depend on what we move on next. Just basically, practical and logistical factors. That's really just going to tell us what's going to happen next. It could just be about budget, timing, talent that we get attached. And how we can pull it off. I really tried to go for the lowest hanging fruit if I can. If we can get another story in and tell it the way we want to, then that's what we're going to focus on. But right now, there's 5 other scripts in development that are different than this one.
Interesting.
Than this current indie this current feature that we're pushing.
Now, I do want to do a shout out to Pamela English. I've known her for a long time on Facebook. I'm glad she's on chat. How hard is it when you make an indie movie, and I'm not asking, the dollar amount, but how hard is it to get funding when you come up with an idea, a screenplay, and you want to make a movie? I mean, what's all involved?
Well, Ron can probably take this question. I couldn't answer that question for this feature because we were self-funded. We self-funded this one.
Okay.
So we didn't go that route. So I think Ron probably answered that question from other project standpoints.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ron.
and that's what a lot of indie filmmakers do. You just have to make sure that you can give yourself, a proper budget to shoot. I've seen some guys try and make things with, pocket change and lint, and that's not going to get you much of a film. And usually those guys have a very ambitious idea they can't pull off. Where Rob had a substantial budget and he made it work, and it shows up in production value, and it shows up in all ways on the screen, and that's what you want. And when I made Dark Relm with Vincent Bellagio. We self-funded, but we also, in addition to what we brought to the table ourselves, we also went out and we did a Kickstarter and crowdfunded part of our budget right there. Because the great thing about that is not only are you getting people involved and you're getting the word out as much as you are also, bringing in funding for your film. And you can also go to other private funders and investors and things like that. And there's other ways to bring in money and other ways that you can budget and bring it in. But when you're crowdfunding, and of course, when you are self-funding, then you don't have to worry about any crazy notes or wants or needs from investors or other funders or anything like that. You really don't have to worry about notes from anyone, because you want to be able to go out there and make the movie that you intended to make, and that's always the thing with funding is you have to know, especially with outside sources, you have to know what deals you're making and what may or may not come with that other funding. But there are several different ways you can do that, whether investing or whether you're crowdfunding, which is pretty popular now as well. You can always find a lot of films that have done that, in full or in part on their funding, as well as, bringing in, their own, budgets as well, their own funding straight into their projects, and we did kind of a hybrid, and Rob went the self-funding route, which makes things easy, because that way you can just you've got it and you can just move, you can just start working.
Well, Ron, have you ever been in a situation in past movies or where the producer, director, or whatever, when they were making their indie movie, took money, from investors, and then you all of a sudden have the investor there at the studio when you're shooting or trying to tell you how to do the movie? Have you ever run across that situation?
Not personally, no. I was never. If they had, I know there's been some issues between a friend that they had worked with. I made a lot of movies with, and I don't want to say who it was, but
don't say his name.
He did have an issue with the production partner with the studio he made it with. In terms of the way things were funded and how things were allocated and when things were allocated, and and this had taken place over the course of 2-3 different films. But yeah, I've not had to deal with so much of that personally, but I have been privy to it, where I know of it, and I've seen some other films and directors struggle with that, with the other production entities and producers that had come in, and somebody that it even had trouble with an indie film, that they had a producer on the film that wound up filing some paperwork with SAG on an indie film, what was supposed to be a non-union film, and wound up with a problem with the Screen Actors Guild, and they essentially were going to owe them, $10,000 or more, something like that, to kind of, rescue the film out of the problems it got into with that contract it then got into with SAG. And that was part of the reason that project was never completed, was because somebody had made a deal, filed some paperwork that was not really applicable to that project, and it got it in all kinds of just a hornet's nest of trouble because of it. So you have to be careful with those things. You have to know that, again, that, when you're going, for contracts and anything, any of your producers and funding entities and studios you're working with, you have to be able to, to trust your partners and not only to work with, but to know that they know what they're doing. You have to vet the people that you're working with.
Well, I've had a couple, again, people who, made movies on here, indie movies on my show. Yeah. And, they told me that some of their movies ran up to $2-3 million. And then I had one guy told me, and his movie was quite interesting. I can't even remember it. I'd have to go back to my notes. But he produced his whole movie for around $50,000. But I guess, I don't know. I mean, nowadays, to make an indie movie, how expensive is it? If somebody's just starting out, they graduate from, one of the schools or colleges, and they decide, now I'm going to actually try to make money in this or produce an actual full-length movie?
Well, it can run the gamut. I mean, I've seen everything from films. I mean, and there are a lot of young filmmakers that can go out and shoot a backyard indie for, you know, 10 grand or less even, you know, 5 to 10 grand, and they can wind up getting something out of it. Now, whether that's good enough and you can you then get that into the market? Can you get it somewhere and you can put it, you know, on a streaming platform yourself and do something with it? And some of them can do that and some of them don't. It depends on the success of the project. And if you write it smartly and use the assets that you actually have and have production value on screen, then you can make a successful film for $10,000. But, you know, by Hollywood standards on the other end, you can have investors and crowdfund and you know, self-fund and do all of that. And even by Hollywood standards, you can be up to somewhere between $5 and $10 million and still be in what they consider to be indie film money, you know, even though you could be in the millions. So, and so indie film really, you know, is the Wild West of indie film right now because, like you pointed out earlier, the technology is there to make it. So what you need is a good story to tell and the ingenuity to be able to tell it properly with the funding and the resources you have. And you know, if it is as a genre that where you need some of the genres, you really do need, you know, name actors to be able to sell it at all. You know, there's certain things, you know, in certain genres like horror where you can sell it on the strength of the story and everything, where you don't need, you know, a lot of really big name mojo to do it. But that's why some of those indie films are made for much, much more, because when you have to go and enlist a name actor to be in it, then you're naturally going to spend more money because you know their fees and their day rates or everything are going to add to your budget, you know, quickly. So it can be anywhere in that range. So anywhere in there, you can spend, you know, I know a lot of them, you know, are talking in the, you know, tens of thousands, even in the hundreds of thousands in budgets like that. And it can go all the way up into the millions and it's still considered indie money. So it all depends, you know, if you're smart and resourceful, it all depends on, you know, that story you want to tell and how you're going to tell it and how much of a budget you have to tell that with, you know?
Well, you know, the thing is, like, I'm making a major movie nowadays. I was totally shocked when I was reading how much it was costing when you get a couple of name actors in it, and you know you're paying them their huge fees and you know all the stuff. I mean, some of these movies, I tell you, I could retire in the Bahamas for the rest of my life and have all the sexy women and fancy cars for what they cost to make one of those movies.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing, but you know, that's the thing about, you know, that kind of art is that, you know, you're trying to tell a story, a big story, and you're trying to do it right, and then you know, you want good actors and you want good location sets and you want to shoot it right, you want to edit it right, you want good music. There's all these elements to bring into it, so you can bring a lot of money, and that's the dedication of a filmmaker, is that they're going to go all out and they're going to go balls to the wall, and they're going to, you know, a good filmmaker will do, beg, borrow, and steal, and get that thing on screen, you know, everything on screen in front of you to tell that story and tell a good story. And that's what I love the passion of filmmakers because of that. Because like you say, I mean, you could just take the money that you have for a film like that, and you could probably go live pretty well with some of that money. I mean, literally, I mean, you take the budget of a film, you know, $5-10 million. You could bank that and live off the interest and go forever. But some guys, you know, when you go raise that, there are some men and women that want to tell that story, want to make that movie. They're going to go out there and going to put that out there and do that. And you could make a lot more. You might not make a lot more. You know, you can have a successful film and get it out there and tell that story. And that's the passion that it takes to do that, because, you know, and if it takes that much money to tell that story, that's what it took to tell that story. And, you know, but that's the passion of making film and making that art like that, is that, you know, they'll put that all down there into that work to make it the way they want to and put it out there, rather than just, stash that money and go, you know, live off of it. It is about, trying to maximize the value on what you're getting from the money, and then maximizing that through your efforts, through your art, your filmmaking, and put